So one of the really hard questions I myself have struggled with and wrestled with, and I've coached and talked to a lot of people over the years is like, should I ask my boss for a raise? And the short answer, you're going to kind of want to watch through the rest of this to see some of the deeper thinking behind it. But my short answer to that is yes. And you need to do it really carefully. Now, one of the first things I will say is that a lot of times it's hard for people to even come to terms with asking for it. And there's a whole lot of reasons. And I think I won't presume I know everyone's reasons for it. But one of the most common ones is it's natural to feel like I want my company to recognize me, and I don't necessarily want to have to tell them that I want to raise. I just want them to see my merit and how hard I'm working. I want them to recognize me and tell me that, hey, we gave you a raise. And I get it. I get it. In an ideal state, that would be fantastic. Unfortunately, the reality, and having been a hiring manager for a number of years, I don't think people always recognize how much work it can be to give someone a raise. And so it's not necessarily, it may not be that your hiring manager doesn't appreciate you. It may be they think they're appreciating you in different ways. And they may also just not think how, based on the effort that goes into giving someone a raise, it's just not normally people's immediate go-to. So this is why I would say universally, yes, you should, if you feel that a raise is really important to you, for your job satisfaction, for the work that you're doing based on market, whatever reasons you have, although I'll talk about some of the ones, and this gets to the end, ask carefully, you absolutely should bring this up with your leader and talk about a raise. Now, here's the carefully part that I think is one of the most important pieces, because I've seen these things go south for a number of different reasons. And one of the biggest ones is that you have to be really self-aware of your own performance. And this is one of the misses. So if you're going to bring up a raise, make sure before you bring it up with your boss or before you talk to your leader about it, you are keenly aware of an objective about your own performance, not just about how you feel about how you're doing, because it's easy to think, a lot of people think they're doing great, and that may not necessarily be the perception of their leader or others that they're working around. So make sure you've done your homework. A lot of times what I've seen is people come to their leader asking for a raise, thinking that I am well deserving of this raise, and they haven't done their homework to back this up, and they're not objective about what their performance is. And as a result, that conversation can get really uncomfortable really quickly and can leave you not feeling that great, can make things tense between your boss, can just make things uncomfortable. And I think this is a really important step, is that you are keenly aware of what your performance is like, not just from your own perspective, but from those you work with, those who are around you. So that's a really important piece to consider as you go into it. Another really important piece, though, is the timing of this. And that may sound like, well, what do you mean by timing? And so I want to explain what I mean by timing. If you work in a company and you haven't been a people leader before, or if you have, you're familiar with the fact that there are performance cycles in your company. You may have quarterly reviews, biannual reviews, annual review, whatever those are. And then typically once a year, there's some sort of merit process that you get a raise and a bonus or whatever your compensation structure is. Knowing what that timing is and how to bring this conversation up and when is a really important factor. Because the reality is, if you bring this up right around that time where there's all sort of, a lot of people don't realize everything that goes into compensation planning and what goes into this merit planning. And so there's already a lot of work, and you actually also may be shortchanging yourself, because if you ask about a raise right before a merit increase, not only is that taken into account for any sort of raise you may be considered for, but a lot of times they're thinking, well, this is just coming right around the corner. Maybe they won't feel the same way once this raise goes into place. So ideally, what I've seen over the years is one of the best timing standpoints is to try and time it as far away from when those raises, and really even when the process is starting. So that process typically starts a couple months before a raise actually happens. So if you can distance yourself from that, that gives enough time to say, hey, this isn't just a, well, I'm asking before, oh, don't worry, we're going to, you're going to be fine once we go through this raise cycle. And it also didn't just happen. So it can seem like you just got a raise and you're already asking for another raise. So again, just being objective about it and saying, ideally, one of the best times to do it is when you are as far away from that merit cycle as possible, because then what can happen is these non-cycle raises are much more, HR is more open to having these discussions. They're more open to giving these types of raises, things like that, because they recognize that you're not right in it. And just objectively, as a people manager, you're not buried in all the planning of thinking about merit and how you're allocating the dollars that you have to all the different people that you have and how all that's going to play out. Your head's not already steeped in all of this, where someone coming to you and asking for a raise can feel more like a burden than I really even have the headspace to focus my attention and help you and think about what this looks like. So thinking about your timing and going, hey, is this something that maybe I can hang on to for a little bit and maybe bring this up out here, is a really helpful way when you're bringing this to a leader to help ensure the most successful outcome. And that can be counterintuitive. Here's another thing on the timing. Okay. Sometimes it can seem like, so should I not bring up a raise if the company's having a downturn? I will just add you have to think carefully about this, because it can be a really bad time to ask, but it also can be a really good time. And so you have to evaluate this carefully, because what can happen is a lot of times when companies go through down times, especially let's say there's been a number of layoffs recently, it actually counterintuitively can be a good time to ask. Because if you're coming on the heels of a big layoff, they recognize we are down people, morale is low, performance is going to be lower. We actually have an opportunity to engage the people who are still here. And so a non-cycle performance or merit raise may actually help incentivize this person to stay. So you may think, oh, we just went through this round of layoffs, it's a terrible time to ask for a raise. It may actually be a good time to do it. So just something to consider along there is that there may be things where you go, well, the companies didn't have a great year, or we just went through layoffs, I'm going to avoid this like the plague. Actually, that may be a time to consider doing it that you may not be thinking about. But again, you have to really evaluate how you're considering that. Now, the other piece is obviously how you ask can make all the difference in the world. You know, should I ask about this? Well, yes, but almost how you ask is more important than asking in and of itself. One thing that I've seen, and this tends to happen with folks earlier in career, but it can happen, and I've seen it happen. Do not make it about your financial situation. Your financial situation is not necessarily the responsibility of the company. And as a result, it can almost just distance the conversation from, well, and also as a hiring manager, I can't go to HR and say, I really need to give this person a raise because they're in over their head right now, or they just bought a house, or that's not a viable justification for giving someone a raise. So if that's all you come to the table with is, I'm really strapped right now, it won't be something that actually empowers your manager to go have an effective discussion. Because again, something that people may not always be familiar with is managers can't just willy-nilly give out raises to people. And in many cases, they're not the ones who hold the keys to those decisions. They can advocate for it, they can bring it up, they can make a recommendation, but ultimately they don't own that decision. And if the only ammunition you give them to justify it is, well, I'm just tight financially right now, you're not actually giving them good things to bring and help make the case for that. Never make threats or comparisons to other organizations. Again, what that does is that ends up putting you against your manager. And again, you want your manager to be your advocate for this, because they don't hold the decision. So threatening your manager about this, or saying, I'm going to quit if I don't get a raise, is going to put you distanced from them, instead of saying, I really, want to continue supporting and driving performance here. I feel that this is something that will help contribute to this and that. You don't want to create distance, because again, you need your leader to be the advocate, to be the person who's helping push this. You don't need to divide yourselves from them by isolating or comparing or saying this, because in many cases, it may be out of their control. And the other thing that just goes naturally with this is make sure you're making it clear you want to work there and are opening to figuring out how you make this work. You really want, again, to be a partner for them. You don't want to be seen as an adversary, someone who's out trying to fight against your manager, what that is. So that's the how you ask. Those are some of the biggest things to consider with the how you ask. The last piece I will close on is one of the biggest mistakes I've seen when it comes to asking for a raise is, again, remember, you're going to your boss. They need to build a case for why they need to do this. It's not just them. They don't have a drawer of money they can just open and go, yeah, sure, why not? I'll pay you more money now. You're asking them to advocate and build a case for this. And one of the most important things you need to do is be able to tie this justification, because this goes back to HR and how they evaluate compensation and how they determine whether or not this is justified, things like this. You need to be able to connect your ask for additional financial support to a change in your responsibility, additional things that you're taking on above and beyond what you're doing. And this is a challenging area because what I have seen over the years, and I've been guilty of it myself, is it's easy to go, I'm really good at my job, so I should get paid more for doing it. And the reality is many organizations, if they're doing it right, are looking at things saying, if you're doing really good at your job, that is what is expected of you. Companies are not in the business of hiring people to be mediocre or bad at their job. Now, it's easy to point fingers and go, well, I know lots of people in these roles and they're not carrying their weight. That's fine. You may be able to highlight those examples, but using that as your justification is not a strong argument, because at the end of the day, the company's saying, hey, we expect people who are hired into this role to do that job very well. So what you need to be able to do is show that I am going beyond the scope of what this job is, or the additional contributions. My ability to do this job really well is actually elevating this job to something bigger than what you typically would put somebody in here. And that's why the merit or the increased salary is justified, because I'm not just doing a great job at the job I was hired to do. That's what's expected of me. What I'm doing is I'm going above and beyond what is expected of me. And that is why I believe that there is additional opportunity for some increase in my financial piece. Now, this can actually even help your manager in other ways, in that this can help even potentially build the case to create a possible job change. Because if you build a strong enough case to say, the job that I was hired into, what I'm doing now is in significant excess of this, this will then lead that to go back to HR to say, maybe we need to reevaluate what this person's doing. And is it possible they need to be in a different job, which opens a lot more doors, because now there's the possibility, if you're not familiar with how all this stuff works, jobs have certain grades and tiers and they have pay scales. And if you can build a case to justify that the job I'm doing is actually bigger than the job I was hired into, if it's significant enough, the organization can look at that and then say, I think we actually need to create a new job at a higher pay tier, which may open opportunity not only for you to get the merit increase that you're looking for, but it actually may increase the possibility for future promotions. It may increase the possibility for your pay to continue to go up. So I think that's a really important consideration, is that when you're thinking about this, make sure that before you ask, you're thinking about, how can I connect this ask for a pay raise to significant changes in the responsibility of my duties. Hopefully you find this helpful and it gives you some food for thought on, yes, you absolutely should ask for a raise if it's something that's important to you, but make sure you do it well.